Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Tales of Herding God Part 222 based on novel. So let's start. Mua, let me take a look at your eye. Granny Sai stared at his eyes for a while, and she didn't see Fu Riluo in this eye. She used a mirror to reflect, but there was still no trace of Fu Riluo in these eyes. Only then was she at ease and she instructed, "You can use this eye, but don't use your magic power. Granny will handle any danger we meet. After we meet Saint Woodcutter, you will still have to use this golden willow leaf to cover it up properly." Qin Mu nodded his head and kept the golden willow leaf. It was still his first time using the third eye in the heart of his brows to observe the world. He looked around curiously, and the world as seen by this eye was somewhat different from the things he saw with his two normal eyes. When his two normal eyes looked at divine arts practitioners, they would see the outer appearance, while in the vision of his third eye, everything became strange. When he looked at Granny Sai, other than seeing Granny Sai's outer appearance, he could even clearly see Granny Sai's divine treasures, and even Granny Sai's primordial spirit. The most terrifying thing was when Qin Mu saw Granny Sai's primordial spirit, he actually felt that it was delicious. There was a pang of hunger making him want to eat her primordial spirit very much. He didn't know where this feeling was coming from, but he felt his stomach was rumbling with hunger, having a terrifying desire to just grab Granny Sai's primordial spirit out from her body to swallow. The starvation was real, and this made him have an urge to swallow everything. When they were in the ruins of Without Embroiling City, he opened his third eye for the first time. An earth count appeared to smack his jade pendant into his third eye. Mute, blind, and the rest then forged the golden willow leaf to seal this eye, therefore he didn't feel any difference. Now after opening his third eye, only then did he notice the peculiarity. Is it the problem of this eye, or is it the problem of Lufu heaven? Qin Mu suppressed his urge to swallow Granny Sai's primordial spirit, and he fell in deep thoughts. It shouldn't be the problem of Lufu heaven. Lufu heaven is a world of the devils. Even if there's a problem, it should only be the problem of the devil Qi. The devil Qi wouldn't make me feel hungry, so this problem still lies in this eye. Strange, why would I feel hunger when this eye opens? He was puzzled and could only put this question aside. He followed Granny Sai to head forward to the closest sacrificial altar. Saint Woodcutter and the 24 gods had constructed numerous tall pyramid sacrificial altars used to sacrifice Supreme Emperor Heaven, forcing Fu Riluo to stop the war. To prevent the sacrificial altars from being destroyed, Saint Woodcutter would definitely protect these sacrificial altars, and before these altars are destroyed, Fu Riluo and the rest would also not make a move and clash with Supreme Emperor Heaven. Heading to the sacrificial altars to find Saint Woodcutter was the best choice of action. Qin Mu looked around, and the Lufu heaven he saw was basically the same as the Lufu heaven Fu Riluo showed him. It was even more treacherous. Huge planets moved above Lufu heaven, and the magnetic force of the planets was disrupting with Lufu heaven's magnetic force, causing the ground to quake violently. The magnitude to the earthquake was so terrifying that it caused volcanoes to erupt. The speed of the storm even surpassed the speed of the storm by dozens of times. The gales were like blades and seemed to be spirit weapons with the strongest power. Everywhere they blew past, and even volcanoes that just rose were turned into powder under the sharp gusts. The most terrifying thing was still the ocean. Waves that reached the sky was moving at terrifyingly high speed, and the speed of the waves has also surpassed the speed of sound, destroying everything in its path. Earthquakes, gales, waves, volcanoes, this was earth, water, wind, and fire. These elements had made Lufu heaven unsuitable for any life forms to live on it. This place was that scary. As a result, the space had become unstable too. The shattered space formed a long and narrow crack between heaven and earth. Like mirrors without any thickness, it reflected sights that were either far or near. These space cracks were either so long that one couldn't see the end of them, or they were very short, being only 2 to 3 feet. Because there was no thickness, it was very difficult to notice, therefore every step had to be very careful. If one was to pass through a crack in space by accident, they would most likely be split cleanly into 2 halves. The space was too sharp and one would probably realize they were already dead after they were sliced. Qin Mu and Granny Sai were defending against the huge waves that were rushing over, and they saw a huge wave that was over 10,000 feet being sliced apart by an astonishing space crack, splitting the wave into 2 halves. Stars flashed in front and behind Granny Sai and formed great overarching heavenly stars force field, and she borrowed the force field to sense the dangers in her surroundings. At the same time, the force field could defend against the disaster of Lufu heaven. Granny Sai was already in existence, who had entered God realm, and even though Lufu heaven was dangerous, it still wasn't a threat to her life. Qin Mu looked around and he looked at this place that was as terrifying as hell. There were countless souls floating around and those were souls of Lufu heaven's devils that had died. This hugely raised his appetite. He hurriedly controlled his desire of swallowing those souls and he felt fear. What monster has this eye turned me into? Right at this moment, they suddenly saw a huge corpse of a devil god prone in the center of a storm, on the barren plains in front of them. No matter how strong the storm was, it was unable to move the corpse at all. They came to the front and even when the corpse was prone on the ground, it was still over 100 yards tall. This corpse grew wings, which had also turned into bones and his 4 hooves were like huge bull hooves, however, they were shiny golden. Not only that, Qin Mu even saw glowing divine treasures in the body of this devil god. There were sun, moon, stars and even land inside. The divine treasures were already destroyed and the land was submerged in water. Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Tales of Herding God Part 225 based on novel. So let's start. The essences in their corpses, divine weapons, and devil divine weapons were all absorbed by this divine mountain. Not a drop was left behind and just a light touch could turn them into dust. Jahwali examined the corpses of these 3-headed and 6-armed god and he frowned. He looked at Qi and asked with a low voice, "Are these corpses from the god race in the celestial heavens?" Qi shook his head and said with a low voice, "I don't know too. There are some 3-headed and 6-armed god, but they don't belong to a race. Furthermore, there are so many of them here, so I don't think they are from the celestial heaven. This divine mountain." He shook his head. "The one is the celestial heaven is then the real one, this should be a fake one, but why is this mountain so strong as well?" He was slightly bewildered. The demon knife behind Jahwali opened its demon eye and it looked around. "Even the demon, I couldn't see anything." "What you mean is this divine mountain is real? How can that be possible?" Jahwali said puzzledly. Qi looked up and he saw Qin Mu walking very quickly, almost reaching the mountaintop. He said hurriedly, "This divine mountain is strange, let us go up too, if there any treasure, he will probably take it first." The 2 of them rushed hurriedly only to see Qin Mu standing at the end of the stone steps. The 2 of them came to his side in a hurry, and they saw a devil god standing in front of Qin Mu. His eyebrows were long and he grabbed a 3-point double-edged knife, looking very awe-inspiring. The 2 of them raised their head, and saw the face of the devil god projecting a natural dignity and power. He was looking down at them as though the 3-point double-edged knife could slash down at them any moment. Qi and Jahwali's body froze and they didn't dare to move. Qin Mu let out a shaky breath, and moved his footstep to move to the side of this devil god. He saw another face. He walked 1 round around this devil god, and this devil god actually had 4 faces on his front, back, left and right. He said with a smile, "Two senior brothers, there's no need to worry, he should be dead for a long time. When I just climb up here, and saw the eyes of his back face staring at me, I was also frozen in shock, and thought I was going to die in his hands." Qi Jui and Zhehuali came back to their senses, and they each let out a sigh of relief. Their bodies were filled with cold sweat. Zhehuali circled around and said in astonished, "Four-faced devil god. Could he be the previous respectable king? Why is he standing here? He didn't enter the hall." Qin Mu examined in detail and said, "Four faces, one more than Fu Riluo. Could it be the same technique as Fu Riluo? Fu Riluo has yet to cultivate to his level." Qi Jui followed him to walk around this respectable king, and he examined carefully. It might not be so. Fu Riluo has ears at the back of his head, and he didn't have the fourth face. They should be from the same race, but different breed. Fu Riluo's cultivation wouldn't be weaker than him. The wound is right here. He discovered something and he pointed at the neck of the four-faced respectable king. Qin Mu looked over and he saw a fine red line that was hard to detect on the neck of the four-faced respectable king. This respectable king should have suddenly suffered from a sneak attack when he fought his way here and got his neck smeared. Qin Mu opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of air to transform into wind. He blew at the head of the four-faced respectable king. The head of this respectable rolled off his neck and smashed on the stone steps, breaking like porcelain. Next, the body of this respectable king was like a devil god statue made of porcelain. He quickly crumbled. His corporeal body was already emptied and the flesh and blood had already ceased to exist. Only his skin was left. That three-pointed doubled-edged blade had shattered into pieces. Qin Mu shuddered and he turned around to look at that shrine. The four-faced respectable king had suffered from an attack, just as he was about to step into this shrine, and got his head severed, slaying his primordial spirit. At this moment, this shrine was right in front of them, the door opened and it was dim inside. From time to time, light would flow into his vision. Qi Jui's gaze flickered and he said gently, "Brother Qin, are you going in? There might be danger inside." Qin Mu gritted his teeth and walked forward while saying solemnly, "Two senior brothers, I shall go in to scout first. If there's danger, I will inform you guys to immediately escape." Qi Jui was astonished and he said to Zhehuali. Zhehuali revealed a look of astonishment at him. The two youths were puzzled. Could Qin Mu had really treated them as friends that had gone through life and death, and he was willing to put himself in danger. They didn't have much contact with Qin Mu, but they know that Qin Mu wasn't such a person. In front, Qin Mu walked into the shrine and his figure faded out. The light in the dim shrine was still flowing. Qi Jui and Zhehuali looked nervously at the door of the shrine, and he listened to the movements inside carefully. Suddenly, an incomparably miserable shriek sounded out, and the two of them felt their blood ran cold. Qin Mu's miserable shriek came from inside. "There's..." The voice was suddenly cut off. Whoosh! Qi Jui and Zhehuali immediately rushed down the mountain. The two of them transformed into two flowing light that moved incomparably fast. They scaled up the mountain in an hour while they only took a few breaths' time to reach halfway down the mountain. Suddenly, Zhehuali stopped and said solemnly, "Brother Qi, stop. Something is wrong." Qi Jui hurriedly stopped in his footsteps and turned around to reveal a bewildered look. Zhehuali sneered and said, "His scream was pretty energetic. How did he sound like a dying person? Furthermore, do you think a person that could kill the previous respectable king give him time to warn us?" Qi Jui stared with his eyes wide open and he cried out, "What you mean is, let us go up quickly." The two of them quickly flew up the mountain and came to the front of the shrine. Zhehuali took in a deep breath and slowly walked towards the shrine while holding his demon knife. Qi Jui followed behind him and his heads popped out from his neck. He looked around nervously. The two of them finally came to the door, and one head of THG popped out from his shoulders, while the other heads hid behind Zhehwali. He looked into the shrine and he was stunned. They only saw Qin Mu in the shrine, with a bunch of calculation tools to assemble them together. They formed a large-scaled calculation spirit weapon. THG gritted his teeth, and pulled back his 9 heads. The 9 heads combined into one, and he walked out from Zhehwali's back, walking into the shrine. Zhehwali also followed him to enter. The two youths sneered. Qin Mu raised his head and revealed a look of astonishment. He then smiled and said, "Two senior brothers have come right at the moment. I was about to tell you guys that there was a difficult algebra question in the shrine." THG sneered and he examined the shrine. He saw that the center of this shrine was a huge iron throne that was formed with swords and knife. A 3-headed and 6-armed god sat on the throne, and 5 of his hands were grabbing onto an iron throne. The other hand was pointing in one direction. His 3 heads were faced in different directions and his mouth was wide open. His eyes were rounds from staring and he seemed to be giving out a heart-wrenching roar. What was even stranger was that the flesh and blood in his entire body dried up, and he was like a dry corpse that was emaciated. The flesh and blood in his entire body were dried up, and only his dry skin was stuck onto his bones. His eyes in the eye sockets were also dried out, sinking into his eye sockets. Only his black shriveled-up pupils could be seen. In front of this 3-headed and 6-armed god floated a small case. It was a jade case that wasn't very big and it floated silently. Trails of sunlight leaked out from the small case, and swirled around the small case. Meanwhile, around the surroundings of this small case were grains of star-shaped star sand of all sizes that were swirling around this small case. Meanwhile, this 3-headed 6-armed devil god was pointing at a mural, and on the mural was a picture of a bunch of stars. It took up the entire wall. THG and Zhehwali followed the direction of his finger, and he realized where he was pointing was a stellar system. In the center of that stellar system was a picture of a land, and on the land were still layers of heavens. The stars that are swirling around the small case is indeed an algebra question. THG examined carefully, and he revealed an astonished expression. He cried out, "Great heavenly cycle stars, algebra of the celestial heavens." "Zhehwali, have you learned this before in Spirit Elite Guards?" Zhehwali nodded his head, and his expression was grim. It was indeed the great heavenly cycle star's trajectory. Inside even contained a difficult algebra question, which corresponded with the cycle of stars on the wall, forming a killing formation. As long as they solve this difficult problem, they will be able to enter the killing formation and take out this small case. The two of them hurriedly took out all kinds of calculation spirit weapons to rapidly calculate. At this moment, Qin Mu stood up and the huge calculation spirit weapons beside him flew back into his Dao Tai sack. "Senior brothers, there's no need to calculate, it's 33,000 years." Qin Mu walked forward and examined the heavenly cycle star's killing formation that shrouded the small case and said, "It's the star atlas of 33,000 years ago. It has slight difference from eternal peace's astronomical phenomenon. I'm ashamed to say it, but when I solved the question just now, I actually comprehended the true 14th sword for Dao sect from it." He raised his eyebrows and turned around to face the mural. He said with a smile, "Furthermore, I even had a wonderful discovery. The star atlas on this mural is from the southern part of Great Ruins 33,000 years ago. The place it is observing is in the vicinity of the Southern Sea. Do you guys think it's weird or not? This 3-headed and 6-armed god is from Great Ruins South Sea 33,000 years ago." THG and Zhehwali looked at each other in the eyes, and they immediately stepped into the heavenly cycle star's killing formation, rushing towards that small case. Qin Mu solved the question, and had the answer, so they could use this answer to easily rush into the killing formation to seize the small case. "Crap, I seem to have calculated wrongly. In front of the Star Atlas mural, Qin Mu slapped his head suddenly and stamped his feet. It should be 35,000 years instead. Senior brothers, you guys. Why have you guys gone in already? What am I supposed to do now? In heavenly cycle stars killing formation, THG and Jahwali heard the voice of Qin Mu traveling over, and they both coughed up blood. They didn't vomit blood, because of Qin Mu. It was the sudden change in heavenly cycle stars killing formation, which suddenly transformed into a resplendent Milky Way. The starlight pulled one another and connected with each other. The chains of starlight were formed by countless complicated divine arts runes, and they transformed into an activated killing formation, which severely injured both of them at once. Meanwhile, looking from their angle, that small jade case in the center of the Milky Way had become a huge rectangular box that was hanging in the center of the Milky Way. It floated up and down in the galaxy, and rays of sunlight also became incomparably thick, entwining mutually with the stars. This killing formation wasn't what they could defend against. 35,000 years, is this number real or fake? The two of them coughed up huge mouthfuls of blood and they each executed defensive methods while gritting their teeth. No matter, we need to try everything we can. Their brains operated at full power and calculated the trajectory of the stars and starlights. They avoided the starlight chains and moved quickly. The killing formation gradually stopped and the stars in the surroundings returned back to their normal sizes, transforming back to grains to star sand that swirled slowly. Cold sweat rolled down THG and Jahwali's forehead, and they looked at each other in the eyes. When they were about to rush into the center of the killing formation to seize the small case, Qin Mu was already there standing in front of it. THG panicked, and he was about to take a step forward when his chi and blood churned. He was astonished. He was injured just now, and he got grazed by a starlight chain just now. A huge wound opened up on his shoulder, yet this wound didn't heal automatically. Instead, fresh blood kept flowing out and balls of blood were floating towards that shriveled up corpses on the Iron Throne. He hurriedly looked at Jahwali. Jahwali was also injured, and like him, he couldn't control his chi and blood as well. Fresh blood was also floating over to that dried corpse. The first droplet of blood landed in the mouth of the dried corpse. The surroundings suddenly became silent, so silent that it was slightly strange. A long howl suddenly came from the mouth of the dried corpses, and creaking sounds came right after. The both of them felt their hair standing on ends and they hurriedly sealed the wound on their body, yet they could still feel their vitality being drained. Something is strange. Jahwali made a split-second decision, and he immediately moved back to rush out of the shrine. THG hesitated for a moment as he looked at Qin Mu, who was in the formation. He gritted his teeth, and also retreated out from the shrine. The instant THG rushed out of the shrine, he swept his sleeve and an ancient parasol tree emanated with golden flames to seal off the door. Jahwali turned back and raised demon knife to slash down. The knife light instantly separated and covered the ancient parasol tree. The two of them rushed down the mountain like two furious dragons, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Qin Mu also felt his hair standing, and he hurriedly grabbed the small case to run out. Just now, when the chi and blood floating out from Jahwali and THG's body flew towards the dried corpse and landed into the other two heads, creaking sounds also came from that two heads of that dried corpse. The three heads were slowly turning and looking over at him. In the eye sockets of his three heads, his shriveled eyes were slowly regaining blood and gradually bulging up. Qin Mu has already rushed out heavenly cycle stars killing formation, and came to the door of the shrine. An ancient parasol tree came smashing down at him. The one with the surname Qi. Qin Mu placed the small case under his armpit with one hand while his other hand grabbed his sword pellet. With a vibration, countless small flying swords came flying out and transformed into sword-treading mountains and rivers, colliding with this ancient parasol tree. Qi Mu had executed this great divine art in a hurry, so the power of the ancient parasol tree wasn't very strong. It was only enough to block him for a moment, and if it was a complete move, even Qin Mu would have to execute Calamity Sword to deal with it. Sword-treading mountains and rivers attacked over, and severed the ancient parasol tree, breaking through Qi Mu's divine arts, paths and skills. Yet knife light came pouncing in his face and broke sword-treading mountains and rivers. Zhehuali. Qin Mu was furious and he avoided the blades of this move from Zhehuali. Turning around and swinging his sword, the second form of Dao sword, binding of 5 Qi and 3 Eons, erupted, breaking Zhehuali's move. There was no more divine art blocking the door of the shrine. Qin Mu squat and his legs burst forth with strength to eject forward. With a loud boom, the air in front of his compressed into a wall which split straight afterward. Qin Mu's body soared into the air as he rushed out of the door to the shrine. A smile gradually bloomed on his face. Yet, his body was suddenly frozen in the air. Before the smile on Qin Mu's face could fully bloom, it vanished and slowly turned into fear. His feet were floating backward and he couldn't touch the ground. No matter how he executed his divine art, there was no use. Qin Mu tidied his clothes in the air, and he carried the small case in his hands respectfully. When his feet finally touched the ground, Qin Mu immediately raised the jade case high above his head, and said solemnly, "Spare my life, Senior." His hands became lighter as the small case flew up. Qin Mu sneaked a glance and saw that jade case landing in front of that 3-headed and 6-armed dried corpse. Yu. That dried corpse wasn't really a dried corpse. Instead, his qi and blood were dried up and his vitality was drained, as a result, turning him into this state that was neither dead nor alive. When Qin Mu and the rest arrived, Qi Jui and Zhehuali got injured and delivered fresh blood to his mouth. This was just barely enough to reignite his life force again. Blood-curdling sounds came from his throat, as he seemed to be adjusting the functions of his corporeal body. Creaking sounds also came from his body, as though his bones were colliding. Yeah, water, or blood. Qin Mu hurriedly took out a water pouch, and offered it up respectfully. Ever since the incident in the flaming desert of West Earth, he always had to put some water pouches in his Daotai sack, to store clean water. That dried corpse raised his hand with difficulty, and it was very slow. "Senior, let me do it." Qin Mu went forward and opened up the water pouch politely to place beside the mouth of that dried corpse. After that dried corpse finished drinking one water pouch, his right head gave off a raspy voice, "Water." Qin Mu took out another water pouch, and put it to his mouth. Once he finished drinking, he took out the third pouch to put it at the mouth of his left head. The left head of this corpse drank the water with difficulty. Qin Mu sneaked a glance and his heart was astonished. He saw that the 2 heads that had drunk the water slowly bulging up with flesh and blood. There seemed to be qi and blood flowing in his body. Not only that, his blood vessels were like dry, cracked land receiving the sweet droplets of rain. Soon, there was sound of blood flowing in his blood vessels. This dried corpse. No, it's not a dried corpse. It should be a strong practitioner from 35,000 years ago. He had cultivated a kind of strange technique, which allowed him to sink into a state of feigned death, so he wouldn't be absorbed by this divine mountain. This technique is pretty marvelous and abnormal. Qin Mu thought to himself. The faces of that dry corpse slowly bulged, and he could gradually see some outline of his facial features. It wasn't just skins and bones like just now. However, his corporeal body must have been way too exhausted, so he couldn't regain his original appearance by just drinking water. However, he could still see that he's a middle-aged man. "Senior." Qin Mu was about to say something when he saw that three-headed and six-armed opening his eyelids. In his eye sockets, his eyes were gradually swelling up. Soon, the white and black of the eyeball could be seen clearly. "Which year is it now?" that man said weakly as he raised one hand to grab the small case, placing it on his knees. Qin Mu hesitated for a moment and said, "Now is the year of eternal peace. As for what is the exact year, I'm not too clear." Eternal peace. That three-headed and six-armed man wanted to get up, but he couldn't get up. He asked while gasping for his breath, "Shouldn't it be founding emperor? Could founding emperor era has also died out?" Qin Mu said honestly, "It had died out 20,000 years ago. Senior, you should have sunk into hibernation 20,000 years ago, and once you woke up, it has already been 20,000 years later. Why did Senior come to the territory of the devil race? This is Lufu, heaven of the devil race, and this is the reason why the devil race is facing destruction, and thus, they had invaded Supreme Emperor Heaven. Senior's planet." That three-headed and six-armed man panted heavily. "I'm one of the survivors of Crimson Light era, and I have hid left and right for countless years. Because we wanted to return to our country, we rushed over from our hiding place and planned to return to the ancestral land of Crimson Light. When we were on our way, we heard it was founding Emperor era now, and when we encountered enemies, we had no choice but to escape to this place." Enemies? Qin Mu was stunned. That three-headed and six-armed man said calmly, "The enemies that destroyed my Crimson Light era. Founding Emperor era has also been wiped out. It should be the same group of people. He. I even heard that there's a High Emperor era before founding Emperor era." He shook his head. "I'm a Crimson Light god race of Qiming era. My name is Kai Shi. I was originally the execution supervisor of Crimson Light celestial heavens, controlling the authority of life and death. Any god that has commit crimes would find it hard to escape death on god execution stage." Qin Mu cried out, "In that case, this divine mountain. This mountain isn't a mountain, it's god execution stage." This three-headed and six-armed man, named Kai Shi, paused and took in a breath. Executing gods on the god execution stage. This stage has already absorbed the blood of countless gods that had committed crimes, and as time goes by, great curse would be raised and even I would receive the drawback. When I fought with the devils, I got injured, so god execution stage started to absorb me. I had no choice but to seal myself and go into hibernation. Come help me up." Qin Mu walked forward and supported him. Kai Shi's palm clasped onto his shoulder where it was near the neck, and he stood up shakily. Qin Mu resisted the pain and said, "Senior, you are hurting me." Kai Shi didn't seem to hear him and pressed his shoulder to walk to the front of the mural. He examined the starry sky in the mural and muttered, Ancestral land is right here. I have yet to die, I can still return, they must be waiting for me to report back to them. Do you know? The reason why this god execution stage is so demonic is because it's actually forged with the god execution stage in Celestial Palace's divine treasure. It belongs to a strong practitioner of Emperor's throne. Qin Mu was astonished and he muttered, "Strong practitioner of Emperor's throne." A pain came from his shoulder. Kai Shi's fingernails have already stabbed into his skin, and Qin Mu could feel his blood flowing out. His vitality and blood were flowing into Kai Shi's body. Kai Shi's face gradually regained some color, and his breath also became slightly more stable. He chuckled and said, "That's right. This is the small case that controls the god execution stage. Once this small case is opened, you almost seized this small case away." Qin Mu was slightly dizzy, and it was a sign of losing too much blood. His gaze flickered and he said, "Senior, I'm really hurting. I'm bleeding, god execution stage is starting to absorb my chi and blood." Kaishi's face slowly bulged out as flesh and blood grew. He said with smile, "You are indeed bleeding, but it isn't God execution stage that had absorbed your blood. The water I've drunk cannot replenish my chi and blood. I've exhausted too much, and I need someone's blood." Cough, cough, cough. He suddenly coughed loudly. "What happened to Senior?" Qin Mu asked concernedly. "Senior, are you okay? Do you feel giddy? Is your throat itchy?" Kaishi subconsciously let go of him and raised his forearms to smack his head forcefully. His body swayed and his other two hands gripped onto the small case. Qin Mu said with a concerned and nervous face, "Senior, are you dehydrated? I still have some water here. Does Senior want to take a drink?" "Yeah, I've forgotten. I have added some extra ingredients in these water pouches." Qin Mu stomped his feet and said, "What should I do?" He turned around to walk to and fro. Kaishi grabbed at him and missed, crashing onto the ground with a kneel. "Some water pouches have been added with blood-dissolving powder by me." Qin Mu smacked his fist on his palm and gave a long sigh. "This kind of poison will dissolve blood when coming into contact with the blood. It's used for me to get rid of the corpses. How could I have forgotten?" "Senior, are you okay?" Kaishi knelt there without moving. His eyes slowly rotated toward him. Qin Mu avoided his gaze and took over the small case that he was holding. "Senior's cultivation is strong, so you definitely can detox this poison, right? In that case, I won't be disturbing you. Farewell." After saying that, he slipped away. Kaishi's eyeballs rolled over and divine light shot out from his eyes, boring 2 holes in this shrine. Qin Mu rushed out of the shrine and came onto the steps of the divine mountain. He immediately proned and his body hid under the stone steps. The 2 thick beams of light swept past his head, and the stone steps on the divine mountains were scorched red. Qin Mu waited for these 2 beams of divine light to sweep past and landed on the few stone steps below. Only then did he rose and ran like a furious dragon, leaving a trail of smoke. As he sprinted quickly, he executed his vital chi to create fog behind him, covering the entire mountain with fog. However, from the wound on his neck, chi and blood were leaking out. They were guided out from his body and poured towards the mountain. The wound was created when Kaishi stabbed his neck with his fingernails. On this god execution stage, any small injury cannot heal by themselves or be treated with medicine. Chi and blood would be absorbed by god execution stage, and the only way out was to quickly leave the mountain while one was still alive. The chi and blood in Qin Mu's body were losing at an extremely fast rate. He didn't dare to turn back and look if his chi and blood were being absorbed by god execution stage or Kai Shi. He could only grit his teeth and sprint down. Finally, when he rushed into the bottom of the mountain, his brain was already blank because of the lack of blood. When he heard thunder rumbling beside his ears and his eyes were seeing pitch black. Qin Mu's primordial spirit projected out, and he used it to look around. He quickly took out the dragon saliva from his Daotai sack to smear on his neck. Next, he took out spirit Buddha pills which could replenish his blood and consumed them quickly. He touched his body and his heart was astonished. In just this short moment, he had already become as thin as a match and needed some time to recover. God execution stage, and Kai Shi seized his chi and blood together, so it was already a remarkable feat that he wasn't squeezed dry. I wonder if Kai Shi had to do anything with my chi and blood flowing out so fast. Qin Mu was as thin as bamboo, and he placed the small case under his armpit. He walked forward shakily and left this strange divine mountain as far as possible. He thought to himself, my blood-dissolving powder is placed in the water. He first absorbed Zhehuali and Qi Jui's blood, using their blood to awaken himself, before using that 3 pouches of water to hydrate himself. Blood-dissolving power should have traveled to all parts of his corporeal body with the water. He sucked my blood so it would dissolve with the blood he had seized. He relied on blood awakens so when the blood is dissolved, he will go dormant again. However, if Kaishi had taken precautions, he could have left behind a portion of clean blood. He was a great professional in the healing path and the poison path. He knew how to keep a portion of clean blood, and he also knew where Kaishi had kept the portion of clean blood. It was in Kaishi's eyes, that pair of eyes that had shone off with divine light. He should only have clean blood in that pair of eyes. Therefore, Qin Mu didn't know whether Kaishi would fall into slumber once again, therefore he needs to leave this divine mountain fast. If he was clever enough, he would have to force out the excess water in his body and cause himself to completely shrivel up. He could then use the remaining blood in his eyes to help him stand up. Qin Mu executed his remaining vital qi to catalyze the spirit Buddha pills in his body, and he thought to himself, "Hope he isn't so clever." In the shrine, Kaishi knelt there motionlessly like a wooden sculpture. The fingertips of his 6 arms were leaking out murky water, and that stream was very fine. There was a milky-colored spoiled blood mixed with the water. Qin Mu's blood-dissolving powder couldn't dissolve his divine blood. What it dissolves was the blood he had absorbed from Qi Jiahuali and a portion from Qin Mu. After some time, the water in Kaishi's body had been drained out, and he turned into a 3-headed and 6-armed dried corpse. He was extremely terrifying, but there was a glint that was flowing in the eyes of the front face. Kaishi carefully separated a portion of blood from his eye and he let this bit of blood activate some of his bodily functions. He stood up shakily. His 2 heads hung down and his 6 arms also hung down weakly. The blood in his eyes was too little, so he could only maintain very little bodily function. His other body function could only remain dormant. He moved out of the hall with difficulty, and he only came to the stone steps of this shrine after a long time. His legs buckled and he tumbled down the divine mountain. His speed couldn't chase up to Qin Mu, Jiahuali, and Qi Jiu's running speed, so he took an hour to roll down from the top of the mountain to the bottom. Kaishi rested for a long time before climbing up. He moved his body with difficulty to look or water. Qin Mu was at a lake far away, and he took out bags of blood-dissolving powder to pour into the lake. He saw him walking over shakily, and hurriedly poured the rest of the powder into the lake. He executed a divine art and a cloud appeared above the lake. From the cloud, a divine dragon hung down and stabbed its tail into the lake to stir vigorously. Qin Mu waved his hand and sprinted away. Kai. 2 beams of light shot out from Kaishi's eyes, but he missed him. He could only look at him moving far away. Water. Kaishi was angered and he walked shakily. His body couldn't hold up any longer and collapsed on the ground. So close yet so far, he had finally crawled here with difficulty, yet the lake was poisoned by Qin Mu. If he wanted to find another water source, he will probably have to take 1 to 2 months. If his luck was bad, he might even need to spend 1 to 2 years. At this moment, rumblings of thunder came from the sky. The rolling thunder shocked Kaishi awake, and he flipped over with difficulty. Raising his head at the sky, the mouths on his 3 heads opened up as he waiting for the rain to fall in delight. Dark clouds filled the sky and lightning crossed. The dark clouds became thicker and lower. On a mountain far away, fire dragons suddenly flew up into the clouds and chased away the rainwater. After a moment, the sky turned clear and blue. The dark clouds transformed back into white clouds to float away. Kaishi turned his head around with difficulty, and 2 beams of divine light shot out, piercing 2 holes into that mountaintop. If I find you. On the other side, Qin Mu immediately went down the mountain after chasing away the rain clouds. That mountaintop behind had already suffered for no reason, causing 2 holes to be blown up in it. He has already mostly recovered, but his corporeal body still has yet to recover back to his peak. It probably wouldn't rain for a moment. I should be safe for some time to recuperate and study the use of this small case. He transformed into a black shadow to stick to the ground, covering his traces to leave this place as far as possible. He tried his best not to leave any trace, so that after Kai-Shi woke up after it rained, he wouldn't be able to find where he was hiding in a short time. After a long time, Qin Mu came out from his shadow state and he revealed his form. He lifted up the small case to slowly study. This small case was the central administration of God execution stage, and on the small case was imprinted with all kinds of markings. It was extremely ancient. It should be the rune markings of Crimson Light era, and they were different from the rune markings now. The paths, skills and divine arts of Crimson Light era should be different from now. Qin Mu examined in detail, and he tried to solve the marvel of these rune markings. However, he had never come into contact with the runes of Crimson Light era, so he knew absolutely nothing about it. He could only give up. The surroundings of the small case also have some faintly discernible sunlight that swirled around the small case. This sunlight was harmless. Qin Mu had tried it with his spirit weapon before he even took the small case. The sunlight had no power, so it should only be the light given off by a treasure in the small case. The case wasn't locked, but it was shut tightly. There was no place to pry it open. No matter how much Qin Mu tried to open the small case, he couldn't even leave any mark on the case even with carefree sword. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps rang out and a familiar voice entered Qin Mu's ears. Brother Qin sure is remarkable, to be able to escape even in that kind of situation. I really admire you. Qin Mu placed the small case under his armpits and turned around. He looked at Qi Jiui with a face full of smile. Even though Qi Jiui still had an elegant demeanor, he still had a portion of qi and blood stolen by the Divine Mountain and Kai-Shi. However, compared to the bony Qin Mu, he still has some blood and flesh. Qin Mu first got his qi and blood seized by Kai-Shi, then by the Divine Mountain afterward, thus his body was overexhausted. Qi Jiui and Zhehuali had nearly killed him by trapping him in that shrine for a short while, so the qi and blood he had exhausted was even more than the both of them. This time, Qi Jiui seemed to be well prepared. An ancient parasol tree stood tall behind him and flames spread out in all directions. The phoenix nest on the tree was made from golden rice straws and branches of a parasol tree. The nest was shining brilliantly in gold and a 9-headed phoenix was resting in the nest. The 9 phoenix heads were spewing fire to temper its own body. His great divine arts has already accumulated its power. Where is senior brother Zhehuali? Qin Mu looked around and asked. Qi Jiui said indifferently, he challenged me and got heavily injured by me, so he had no choice but to run. Brother Qin, you probably don't recognize the small case, right? Why don't I help you solve your question? Qin Mu said solemnly, I'm all ears. I don't know how did Crimson Light Celestial Heavens call this small case 35,000 years ago, but in our celestial heavens, this small case has a very famous name. It's called God Execution Mysterious Knife. Qi Jiui stabilized himself, and the 9-headed phoenix on the ancient parasol tree also raised its head to look at Qin Mu. Qi Jiui's gaze landed on the small case and he said, as for what the small case is used to store, Brother Qin wouldn't know if you aren't an official in the celestial heavens. This kind of small case is normally used to store human head. Human head. Qin Mu was astonished and shook the case. There was no sound of a human head tumbling around. Qi Jiui raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, to put the head of a strong practitioner on Emperor's throne, using it as a knife to execute gods. Brother Qin doesn't know how to open this case, you can give it to me. I can open it up to show Brother Qin. Qin Mu offered the case forward with both hands and said sincerely, there you go. Qi Jui's gaze landed on the small case, and he took in a long breath. The ancient parasol tree behind him also floated up, as he executed Emperor's Throne technique. Qin Mu let go of the case and the case fell to the ground. On the palm under the case was a sword pellet that was currently swirling. Qi Jui retreated, and his body passed through the ancient parasol tree. The tree grew furiously until it was 50 yards tall. The 9-headed phoenix on the tree screeched, and flapped its wings to attack Qin Mu like a beam of light. Twang! His sword light suddenly became incomparably bright, and Calamity Sword suddenly erupted to face the 9-headed phoenix. In an instant, flames overshadowed the sunlight in the sky. Sword and fire exploded among the mountains, and they expanded furiously like a small sun, and an incomparably bright ball. Qi Jui erupted, and he struck forward with a phoenix mudra. The ancient parasol tree followed right behind the 9-headed phoenix, and destroyed everything in its way as it came smashing down. This video will end here.